Today, boys and girls, we're going to look at our last Asian philosopher that we're going to talk about, Mao Zedong. Now, I'm going to start off by showing you a picture. This is a picture that circulated on Twitter not too long ago. It's a picture of Korea, North Korea and South Korea. And if you know, North Korea is communist and South Korea is not. Now, I want you to look at the picture. This is taken at nighttime from a satellite in space. You can see South Korea shining bright. You see Japan down in the bottom left. You can make out the shape of the island of Japan, just like you can make out the shape of South Korea. But can you make out the shape of North Korea? And we're going to talk about that because Mao Zedong was a communist as well. Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao, known in China, Mao Zedong, just another old bald pudgy guy. It's going to be the focus for today's philosophy lesson. So what can I tell you about Chairman Mao? Well, he was born in 1893. He was born to parents who were peasant farmers. They were quite well-to-do in their area, apparently. He did very well in school. He gravitated towards the more liberal arts. He was said to be a poet. He enjoyed poetry. He had a run-in with his teacher, apparently, at the age of 12 or 13, and left school. His parents, at the age of 14, his father specifically, thought it's time for him to grow up, get a job, and get married. So he found a wife for him and had him married off and found a job. Mao Zedong liked neither of those. He got into an argument with his father, surprise for a 14-year-old to get in an argument with their parents. And he left the village that he lived in. He moved to a city in order to study. He said what he liked to do was to study. He wanted to become smart, become learned. At the age of 17, he joined the Nationalist Party and he studied at a local university. He became focused on a guy named Karl Marx. Karl Marx was co-author of a book called The Communist Manifesto, and it was all about why communism is the best system in the world for any country. So what is communism? Well, communism is the belief that people are oppressed, and they are oppressed because of capitalists. Well, what is capitalist? Capitalism is a system whereby people can decide that they want to produce something like pencils. And so what they do is they take their own money and they get a factory and they get machinery and they hire people to make pencils for them, and they sell the pencils. And they keep most of the profits for themselves. They take most of the risk, but they keep most of the profits because of that risk. Karl Marx thought that that was a very bad system. And in a communist ideal, in a state where everybody was equal, which is what communism is supposed to be, the state should own the factory, and the workers should all work not for a wage, but just for the common good. And everybody should be supplied the means of surviving. So in a communist system, they say oppression is caused from capitalism. There's no money. The state owns everything. The state runs everything. That's communism. Mao Zedong fell in love with this idea. So because of his philosophy, his basic philosophy, which is outlined in communism, he ran into issues with the Democratic Party, and in very short order found himself at length with the party. So he was one of the founding members of a new party called the Red Party, or the Chinese Party, the Chinese Red Party, the Communist Party. And the two parties very quickly were at odds. They both had different opinions on how best to run China. And a civil war ensued. And at the same time, a civil war was ensuing in Russia. Basically the same thing. Lenin had studied Karl Marx and communism as well, and he thought it was best for Russia at the time. So there was civil war. Millions of people were dying. So in China, back to Mao Zedong found himself leader of the Red Army, and he became a pretty good leader. And he became known by the peasants all throughout China as having their best interests at heart, which is foundation of communism. Everybody's treated equally. And it became a state of civil war. Civil war ensued. What broke up the Civil War was World War II. World War II, the Japanese invaded China and they wanted to take over China. So the two sides in the internal conflict in China got together. The Democratic Party and the Red Army got together, and they fought off, with the help of the Allies, they fought off the Japanese. And when the dust all settled, when everything was said and done, Mao Zedong found himself the leader of China. He was immersed in communist ideology, so he started to run the country like a communist country. He was taking over, getting the government to take over just about everything. And at first, things were quite good. There was free health care. He was a champion for women's rights, which wasn't really a big thing at that time in China, but he pushed women's rights, and many thought, you know, this guy's a great leader. However, there was opposition. And because there was opposition to his rule, there was people who were starting to go against him, and he didn't like that. And about this time frame, historians say that his persona had changed. He had envisioned himself to be more godlike. He had thought of himself to be more of a supreme leader. Now, what happened next was he knew that people were against him in China, so he very brilliantly came up with the idea of the 100 Flowers campaign, where anybody who had any issues with the Communist Party or had any good ideas on how the country should be ruled or had any differences with the Communist Party, they should all get together collectively and they should voice their opinion. And Chairman Mao said he would take their advice. So what happened was all kinds of people got together and they voiced their opinion on why they thought the country wasn't working or wasn't as good as it could be. And then at the end of the campaign, Chairman Mao knew who his enemies were. He rounded them all up and got rid of them. Some got locked up, some disappeared. Shortly after that, things went from bad to worse. He started a campaign to improve China. The campaign went from the late 1950s, 58, I think, until about 62. And it was a campaign to industrialize China. Now, what happened? Well, the campaign was a dismal failure. He took people from rural areas and moved them into urban areas and tried to industrialize very, very quickly. He tried to do things very, very, very fast. What happened is he overfarmed the land. The land could not support what he was trying to grow there, and a famine ensued, the largest famine in Chinese history. There are estimates that say between 40 million people to over 100 million people, and because it's a communist country and we don't have access to records, it's hard to say how many million people died. But to put that in perspective, Canada hasn't hit the 40 million mark yet, so we're just under 40 million. So the low conservative estimate on how many people died in the 4 to 5 year time frame in China was 40 million. The high estimate's over 100 million. So to put that in perspective, that's like the whole of Canada's population disappearing in a very short time frame. It's disconcerting on the world stage, to say the least. So what happened? It was a total failure. Now, Mao Zedong was still of the communist ideology, still of the communist philosophy. So in tradition, he just went right back at her again, and he came up with a new campaign. He started it off with a swim across the Yangtze River. He blamed everything. He blamed the last focus that he had, the last 4 year campaign. He blamed it, the outcome on traditional communist or traditional Chinese society. So he started again, and he got the people to back him. Specifically, though, he went to the young people. He went to the young people and started something called the Red Guard, which were young people. And he did it in the same manner as Hitler did it during World War II. Hitler started the Nazi youth groups. Well, Chairman Mao did the exact same thing. He started youth groups in China, and he got these youth groups to carry out his ideologies. Because young young people are not as set in their ideologies and their philosophies as older people, so it's easier to convince them of stuff like communism. It's easier to convince them that communism is in the best interests of China. So the Red Guard started in 1966. And what they started was a cultural revolution. They tried to get rid of old customs, they tried to get rid of old traditions and start a new China. And things didn't pan out well for the populace. So the philosophy of Mao Zedong was that of a communist ideology. And it didn't work well for the people. And I bring that up because wherever communism has been instituted as a form of governance, it never works for the common people. Now, there are people who say that communism didn't work in Russia, for example, didn't work in the USSR because of the culture. Well, you can't use culture as a rationale for saying a system didn't work. And the reason you can't is because it's been tried. Communism has been tried in just about every culture on the planet. And it is not proven to be of benefit to the general populace. Traditionally, where the communist ideology, the ideology or philosophy of Mao is instituted, someone becomes godlike, millions of people die. And that's historically what has happened every time communism has been instituted. But anyway, that's my summation of Chairman Mao. His philosophy was that of communism, and the underlying principles of communism are based on Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, which are that capitalism is the root of all evil, there should be no class in a society, the government should manage everything, everything should be owned by the state. Boys and girls, have a nice day.